In this video, I want to discuss something I recently released called the DFF, that is the Data Feed Framework. DFF is basically a framework that allows you to easily create RSS feeds, as well as easily consume RSS and Atom feeds. Feed creation is basically through what I call the feed builder, and the consumption is through what I call info blocks. Now, this video serves as a demo, an overview, and basically visual documentation of the entire system. So let's go ahead and look at this. The first thing we're going to look at is actually DFF itself. So let's go over here and just look at a feed. This feed right here was created with the feed builder. Okay. Let's look at the source and we can see the feed. And yes, it was internally created with RSS.net. So there we go. Now let's look at the info blocks. Each of these is a different info block. This takes an RSS feed from the DFF and shows it in an info block, as do all these except for this one. This one actually comes from Yahoo. So you can use these info blocks to just show information on screen. This is rather useful for portals, for little plugs in a blog, or I don't know, whatever else you want to use it for. I'm actually at 800 by 600 resolution here, so it looks kind of cramped. I wrote a few CSS files for different resolutions, and the one I'm using here is 800 by 600. This one actually overrides the sizes of each of the boxes to make them fit on the screen. I provided a 1024 as well as a 1280 resolution one. Now let's go ahead and not look at some code, but let's look at some SQL. Primarily, let's look at the feed builders SQL. I'm in SMS here, and what we have here are three tables, and these are the three tables of DFF. That's all there is to it. Really, just this first one called feed creation. And each of these, of course, are in this data feed framework database. Let's go ahead and open this up. Each of these is a different RSS feed, and that's really all there is to it. You're looking at a complete RSS feed created. Matter of fact, this is really the whole RSS feed, this SQL statement. This entire thing is based upon a simple interface, an ID, a title, and a description. If you have those three things returned in a SQL statement, you immediately have an RSS feed. Okay? So literally all you have to do is type in a SQL statement, give it a title, and you're done. In this situation, what we have is this feed. Now let's go ahead and change a few things on this. For example, let's change the title. Make it corporate announcements. I'm going to copy that out. The reason I'm copying it out is because I'm actually accessing this by title. So now we've changed the title. I have to change everything. There we go. Now, say I want to change the title on a whim. I'm of course going to want to go by ID. So this is number 3. So let's just switch to ID. There, now we're accessing the same thing. Now let's switch back to something else. Department announcements. Refresh, there we go. Now I could go ahead and change something else in here. For example, I could change perhaps the title. Perhaps I can put a prefix on all these. I'm not being very creative here, but let's just put something in here. There we go. You can see it's all just generated by this SQL statement. Now let's go ahead and jump over to the info blocks real quick. Let's open up this default ASPX here. And first off, we're going to see the register up here. Of course, if you're working with controls, you're going to have a register directive at the top of the page. And now here's my info block. I basically just have ID run at server. Ignore this block size for now. I'm going to come back to that. Ignore this register feed with browser as well. But basically what you do is you just give it a data source and it shows up as a feed. Right here. Now, since I changed the title of this, it wouldn't be very smart of me to just refresh it because of course this changed. And of course it wouldn't be very smart to access by title anyways, unless you know the title is never going to change, which is probably never, because things always change. So let's go ahead and just change that, save this up, and refresh. And there we go. We have the new department announcements. Now, say these department announcements are kind of private. You don't want people just accessing them all over the place. And if you give someone, for example, a feed of that number right there, they could probably go in and just start changing the numbers and guessing. Well, you don't want them to guess your feed. So what you can do is change this up a little bit. Where it says access feed via GUID only, just say true. And now you can only access it by this GUID. You'll see this is not going to allow us to do this. But now if we go up here and say secret ID and put the GUID down, now we can access it again. Now I want you to notice something interesting over here. Of course, the first thing, before I even show you anything else, I'm going to want to change this up a little bit, because now that I've changed that, it won't like us. Secret ID equals this. Let's go ahead and refresh this. And there we go. Now, this little guy down here is of course going to show the feed. That'll allow us to give the block to people as well as the feed all in one shot. So people can come to, say, the intranet or something like that, and instead of having to come to the intranet all the time to see the certain information that they want, you can just say, here, take this RSS feed, plug it into Firefox, you're done. There you go. Now they never have to go back to your intranet if they don't want to. Now, who would we want to give that capability to? Well, of course, management. They're the type of people who wouldn't want to come there if they don't want to. Anybody else? Management's probably going to force them to go to the internet to see other announcements. But we can let executive management get out of that one by doing this. Something else I want you to notice here. What happens when you click on one of these? Well, by default, it takes you to this viewer. And this viewer is actually set in a configuration file. You'll see it right here. The default entry league template. And it is just it's just that, a template, because you have the ID equals and then whatever the ID of that feed is. And you'll see that's exactly what's showing up here. The ID 35. We go back, we can see something else. Now we can of course override that, as I'm doing in a couple other situations. This one right here is somewhat for DBAs. It has the size. For example, if I click on one of these, I know it says SQL database size, but right now it just shows the name. That's because what would happen is you'd click on this and maybe you wrote a page to show the size and other details. You can see down at the bottom there, it's going to some internal website for SQL processes, SQL database details. And this was actually done via a template. If we go back to the database, we can see here, that the template's right there. So we have the ID, the title, and the description. Those are the three required ones. But we also have this template, this link template. And we just have file equals title. Now that could be ID. You could also use equals description in there. That description is there for whatever you need it to do. Matter of fact, you might actually use that if you have some sort of cryptic ID you want in addition to the title, in addition to the ID. You can use this any which way you want to. You can see down here that other ones are using the template as well. This example is the example from a blog using my Minima blog engine. In this situation, it was just a simple SQL statement accessing the Minima tables and then just changing the template. And of course, it also creates the feed. This is a really easy way to create blog feeds. It works with Minima very well. As a matter of fact, future versions of Minima might actually have this integrated in. Now I'm going kind of in an accelerated way here. That's because this is an overview and a demo and somewhat of visual documentation. Everything I'm saying here, in order, is actually in the actual documentation. So you can go there to see more details. So I'm kind of just running through this real quick, giving a quick overview. The next thing I want to show are scheduled entries. This is actually something that's done in this department announcement one. Let's look back at the feed. Now, I initially said that all you had to do was create a statement to create a feed. Well, really a statement and a title. The description is really optional. As you can see, I have blanks here. They're not null, they're blank. So you just kind of got to put in a space there. So if you want to be picky, sure, yeah, a SQL statement, a title, and description is required. Really, all you got to do, though, in terms of actual work, is the SQL statement. However, like I said, you have other options over here as well. You have this GUID, which is automatically assigned. Don't worry about it. And you have this kind of secret system here. There's also something over here, which we'll get to in a second, the database. But look over in this other table for a second. There's two other tables. One is the snippet group, which basically like a categorization. Okay? You'll notice that this one kind of mapped to the title of that feed. It didn't directly because we were able to change it, but it did kind of relate to it. Now then we have the snippet. The snippet table is basically for whatever you want to throw in there. It could be anything. You could just start throwing in names of people, birth dates, whatever. You know, sometimes people say, I need you to put this information, can you create a table? Well, is it really worth creating a whole table? Probably not. You could probably just throw it in here. Now, if somebody's really serious about announcements, they may actually make an announcement table. Not a big deal. Of course, you can access SQL across different tables. My goodness, this is what joins are for, right? I mean, this is SQL. It has all the power of SQL. You're just relying on SQL. So create your own announcement table if you have to. This is for little snippets of little information. Now here what I have is just this, snippets. You can see the group ID basically links to this group. It just is a way to keep it together. It's for your convenience, not a big deal. We have a title, a description. This description is whatever you want it to be, you know. If you want to ignore it, if that's not important to you, ignore it. If you want to use it as an actual description, go ahead. You can use it whatever you want to. The extra column there is really just for whatever you need to use it for. If you want a second ordering thing, go ahead, because we have this order over here which will help you keep things in order. If you want to put information in here, and then in your SQL statement, maybe put an order by. You can do that if you want to, you don't have to. You can do whatever you need to. This just gives you a little extra flexibility. But over here we have this valid begin and valid end. Okay? We'll see dates that, as of this recording, February 2007, are somewhat in the future. Now, you'll see here that not all of these showed up. Okay? The February birthdays showed up. Okay? As well as the Jeans Day every Friday showed up. Okay? So that one and this one showed up. Why is that? Because these two are actually in our date range. This one is actually in our date range. Today's the 26th. And this one has nothing. So this one's going to show up at all times, every time, all the way through, all eternity. Okay? And this one's just going to show for the month of February. This really is a dramatic help if you have to update announcements all the time and you really don't want to. It's like the March ones here are going to just magically show up during that month. That's all there is to it. This is just going to magically disappear at the beginning of that month. Okay? And these are just going to be on there for all time and eternity. You also see in here, I was thinking ahead and I thought, okay, Happy Independence Day. When's that going to show up? Just a week or two or three or whatever that is, you know. This one, as a matter of fact, is going to disappear as well. Matter of fact, that one did disappear. That one was last year, so that's why it didn't show up. Now, here's the thing about that, and take note of this. If you're paying attention, pay attention closer. If you're not paying attention, I don't even know why you're still listening. So, we have up here this from snippet dated. This is actually important. I'm not taking it from this table. I'm taking it from a view. The snippet dated view is actually a simplified way to do that, where this date above this, where the other date lower than this, you know, all this stuff. So we still have the ID, title, and description as we always saw, but we're getting it from this, not the table directly. You could get it from the table directly, but if you were to do that, you wouldn't probably get the results you wanted. See, now it's going to show everything. So to create scheduled entries, and set this back here. So to create scheduled entries, you have to select from the snippet dated and use this valid begin and valid end, or come up with your own custom schema and just use it in here. As long as you're returning an ID, a title, and a description, your feed's going to be created. And like I said, you can access the feed in three different ways: the ID, the title, or the secret ID. Or if you have this guy turned on to true, you can only access it with the secret ID. You're going to get a security exception if you try to access with the ID or the title. Now you can go ahead and do this with all kinds of SQL. Okay? For example, this guy down here is a really long SQL statement. It actually has multiple joins in it, as well as a couple aggregates and then a top, and oh my goodness, it's all kinds of craziness. And it's also in a different database completely. So if you're going to use something in a different database, you could either go through and use the database name, table, and all that crazy stuff, or I provided this ease of use here. You just put the name in here and just call it a day. So you can see this over here. And you can also see I'm using a template as well. Down at the bottom you'll see show contact information. That's not the default. The default is snippet viewer. So you see I changed the template on that as well. So if someone were to come in here and click on any one of these, they could, go to that page. Now let's look at the feed for that. Same thing for the feed. This would be the feed someone would get, an RSS, and it would just show them the show contact information. Subscribe to it here, and there we go. And you click on one of these, it would of course take you to that show contact information. Management would love something like this. Perhaps top sales, perhaps top product, perhaps top this, top that, whatever. Or perhaps if you're in the really deep IT stuff, like servers and stuff like that, you can watch the SQL jobs. I actually have an example of that in here as well. Just kind of see all the jobs where they're enabled. Now let's look at a couple other things here real quick. In the info blocks here, we have something interesting up here. Firefox, as well as IE7, allows you to integrate different feeds with the browser itself. And this is not something you usually get for free. If an RSS feed shows up somewhere on the page, it does not mean you magically get it up here. You have to register it with a link tag, with a link element. Now, I actually have that built in here just for ease of use, where if you say register feed with browser equals true, it's going to go ahead and register it with the browser. So for example, this one here, which we know is the department announcements, is showing up here. So they can come up here and just click on it. Okay? Now if we go ahead and say false and save it and refresh, we try this again, now we see it's not going to show up. Okay? Now this could come in handy for a number of different reasons. If you have a bunch of info blocks on the screen, you want people to access the information elsewhere, and you want all the feeds to just kind of show up in the same place, just train your users to just look up here at all times. They can see all the options. And the last thing I want to go over are the different block sizes. If you see here, we have different types of blocks. We have the horizontal ones, the tall ones, and then the, just whatever you want to call that. What these are the regular, the wide, and the tall. And really you just set that right in here. We have tall, wide, and regular. And you can just kind of choose them. Let's go ahead and pick regular on this one. Save it and reload. And there we go. So as you can see, the DFF really allows you to create RSS feeds really easily, and it gives you this nice little mechanism for showing data on a screen. Now, before I cut this off, let me show one last thing. It's right here. If I go into this general here, I can change the size to 1024. Save this and reload. You can see that now they just popped up a little bit more. And this is what it would usually show up on a real screen. Of course, they'd fit on the screen, but this would be the actual orientation. Now, the CSS I provided in the sample has a number of dimensions. It has the dimension of size, the dimension of theme, and then other specifics. The specifics are required. You can play with them if you want to, but for the blocks to show up in any way that actually makes sense, you're going to need that. And really the size one as well. Feel free to mess with anything as much as you want to, especially the theme. This is just a sample, and it's a sample just for ease of use. Now, in closing, I'd like to say a few things about this as a training tool. You can use this to learn more about RSS. You can use this to learn more about ASP.NET 2.0 custom controls, because this uses custom controls with data binding and templating, which I have to say I don't see too many examples of those on the internet. It also uses LBLGen to access parts of the database, not all of it, because obviously a lot of this is really dynamic, pulling SQL statements out and reusing them. It's also an example of how to use SQL as a development platform. A lot of people just start throwing data in SQL and never really use it as something like as a programmatic environment. Now, I'm not into using cursors and all that stuff, but as you can see here, you can really utilize SQL for a lot of different things. And lastly, it's an example of CSS. So you can go ahead and check out the documentation, which is on my website at netfxharmonics.com, and you'll find it actually in the highlights, the data feed framework. And you can go ahead and look at the screenshot, which gives a better demonstration. You can look at the documentation, which I really hope you do, and please read the entire thing. It's really simple. I don't like reading documentation. I think when people say to me RTFM, I just say forget it. Explain it to me. I don't like reading. I hate reading. So I really made it easy to just skim. Just look through it, look back on it as you wish. And I have two files here. I have the data feed framework as well as the database. They're both required because this is obviously a data-driven application. So that's the data feed framework.